Okay, well, day 3 of wire work here. While we don't have too much time today, what I wanted to talk about was basically just making use of accent wires and such. So everybody that's doing what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. But looking down, what I have here is I wanted to attach the head of my Hammerhead Shark, and I've already worked out before that I added some little hooks on the end because I was not going to be able to incorporate the gills into that. But what I did want to talk about is using accent wires. Now, I gave everybody some copper wire. This is just some more wire that you can get at like a hardware store. You got that as like Home Depot. This is just for comparison. This I've been using is 16 gauge wire. This copper is a little bit thinner at 18 gauge wire. This really fine wire is, as it says in the package, 28 gauge. So this is akin to like your florist wire, things like that. It barely shows up, but that's a definite benefit. And what this stuff is excellent for is, yes, very fine details, but it's also excellent for replacing, like on the Shark, when I originally did this connection here onto the frame to connect my profile to the coil. This fine wire is excellent for just making little lashing connections like I did here, so I can replace that. And what I mean by lashing is basically you can use this wire like string. You could basically, if you're really careful, you can knot it, but you can just wrap it tightly and it makes for a really small, really fine connection. The other thing is I made the head. Now I still want to add a few more features to this, but one of the other things is when I made this head, I was originally going to try to incorporate the gills into this. Now, one, they were going to be too thick. I ran out of material. So I guess there were several, not just one. But I didn't really like how it was going to show up against the coil. Just more of this black steel wire was going to get lost against the coil here. So what's going to be far more useful is if I use this copper wire, even if it's doubled up the same way, it will show up much better against that steel. So what I'm basically going to do is use this copper wire as a back and forth tool to make my gills. What I mean by back and forth is really just going to make a series of sharp bends. Bend around using my needle nose pliers. Crimp. Let's see here. I'm going to bend this out first. And I want these spaced out, so I'm going to bend against one side. Then I'm going to bend the other. So I'm bending on either side of these pliers, so it leaves a gap. But from there, now I can use these, wrap around, and crimp. And I can do the same again. Bend here, bend around the wire, or around the pliers, move the pliers to where it's the same gap, bend again, and I'm just creating this gap between. So this is, I want 5 gills. Squish that down. I should have pulled more of this coil out because I'm using a bit more than I thought I would. Come together, bend, bend. 2 more. Of course, this is also where you want to have your images out. Already, you can see my estimates way too big. Look at the size of the gills. Look at what I made. That's enormous. It's like twice the size I needed to. So there you go. That's why it's always important to have this sitting out. But since this is larger and I've already made it, I'll show you some stuff. So I made the bends just straight. Now you see on here, these gills are not just straight up and down. They're actually somewhat tilted. So now I can add a bit more of a curvature to these. And I'm just using the pliers, holding at the base and just twisting a little bit. There we go. So just a little bit better curvature to these. Now, one of the other things is a few of you we talked to, you had some features and you were talking about adding to them onto your body or your animal here, but how do you get these to help you round out that form? Well, these gills, while they're now from one side, got close to the profile. Again, these are much too large. I need to scale them down. But looking straight on, it's just flat, just like the rest. So this would be the part to where now I could add, and I'm just going to bend these inward a little bit. They're too small. You can use the pliers again. Remember that as you work copper, it actually hardens. Copper is called work hardening. Very clever name, huh? But the more you work with it, it will stiffen. So be aware of that. You keep working back and forth, it will stiffen. Steel just pretty much stays the same. And does that mean that the copper can break? Definitely. You keep working it too much. Now it's going to take a fair amount, but it will break if you overwork it. All right, so just that little bit, that added curvature, now also will better fit the side of the shark. So that's exactly why I did it. But I made it too large, so, but you get the idea. Now the other thing is I want that eye to stand out. So I'm going to make a flat coil with this copper. To do that, small pair of pliers. I'm going to start by grabbing the end and just rolling it over. So now I've got this little tiny coil at the end. If I need to, I can make it even smaller. But basically what I'm doing is readjusting it by clamping in line and as it's flat and flattening it with the pliers. So now I'm going to grab it across the top and bottom, and I'm just going to wrap around, just making more passes. Now this is letting me slip right between the teeth of the plier. I can keep going. I don't need this to be enormous. That's already probably a little bit too big also, but that's okay. So that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be flat. If it starts to get out of whack on you, you can also use the wider, flatter pliers. Remember, these have teeth, as in it'll mar the copper, but that's okay. And you can just put the pliers or put the coil in the pliers and close the pliers a bit, and it will crimp everything back together. Really easy way of working. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this so that the eye will be on the head. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to figure out how can I connect this copper onto here. What I'll probably have to do is have a bit more of a length and then find a way to wrap this on. Now, a good way of working that would be to attach this here somehow, and then to add more definition, maybe bring this wire down and around. Now, when I do that, I might even be able to incorporate the mouth into this. Might. Yeah, that's quite a lot of wire to do that. So I think what I'm going to do instead, so I'm going to cut this short. I can always make another one as I test this idea. I cut this short, and then to attach the eyeball, I'm going to make an angle. I'm going to make a little hook. So now that hook wraps around. And I'm going to hold that eyeball onto my profile. I'm going to use the other pliers, and I'm going to grab just the copper and I'm going to twist around because I'm wanting this copper wire, might need the smaller ones, to just crimp around the steel as tightly as I can get it to go. We're going to see how that works. That's not bad. So it kind of is holding on. I can crimp this copper just a little bit tighter. And remember, if your coil or if your connection kind of starts to slide out of place, you can always just squeeze the two ends back together and smoosh it down again. Yeah, that holds pretty well. So I got one eye. Now, ideally, what I could have done and should have done was made something of a profile around this eye. Now, whether or not that should be copper or out of steel wire, that's what I've been trying to decide. But that's pretty much what you're aiming for when you're using accent pieces, just making little features and such. Now, if you want those to be more incorporated, so I go to add the head on. Great. Then where the gills go, well, obviously these gills are much too large, but you start seeing how all these parts come together. And again, those gills stand out pretty well against the coils of the coils of the steel. Just different ways of using accent wire. So I'll continue to experiment with this, but this is largely what I was trying to get, just this prominent eye to really stand out. But I still want some sort of profile around this head so it has more definition. So I'll keep working that. But that's how you use copper to create accent elements.